They say some battles never really end. For Frank Carter, a 95-year-old Marine who had once stormed the beaches of Okinawa, the war found its way back to him, not in the form of bullets or bombs, but as silence, starvation, and cruelty within the walls of a nursing home. He thought he had left the fight behind when he traded his rifle for a cane. But evil has a way of dressing up in new clothes, and on one quiet Thursday afternoon, it wore a name tag that read Director. Golden Willow Senior Care looked peaceful on the outside. Well-trimmed hedges, white-painted fences, and soft music playing at the entrance. But inside, something was deeply wrong. Jake Carter had come by for a routine visit to check in on his Uncle Frank. As a lifelong member of the Iron Legacy Riders, Jake had a rough edge, but he always made time for family. That day, he brought groceries and a few old war photos to cheer his uncle up. As he walked down the hallway, he heard something he would never forget. The sharp crack of an open hand meeting skin, followed by a heavy thud. Jake sprinted toward the noise and found his uncle lying on the floor, his walker tipped over, his lip bleeding. Standing over him was the facility director, Linda Barrett, adjusting her blazer like nothing had happened. "You filthy old liar," she snapped. "How dare you accuse me of stealing?" Frank, though shaking, tried to lift himself up. "You are stealing," he said, barely audible. "The food money, the meds, all of it." Jake knelt down and helped his uncle to his feet. The moment was tense, but it grew heavier as 14 more members of the Iron Legacy Riders slowly filled the hallway behind him. They had been visiting another veteran just a few rooms down. "What's going on here?" Jake demanded, his voice calm but firm. Linda straightened her posture, putting on a smile like a mask. "Mr. Carter fell," she said, "and now he's confused and making wild accusations." "I didn't fall," Frank whispered. "She hit me, because I found out." That's when Jake noticed something else, his uncle's frailty, the sunken cheeks, the way his shirt hung loose over his shoulders. "Uncle Frank," Jake asked gently, "when was the last time you had a real meal?" Frank's eyes filled with tears. "They give us crackers," he said. "Sometimes just water." That was the moment the hallway went still. The bikers didn't move, they didn't speak, but something had shifted. A quiet rage had entered the room, steady and unstoppable. And that was just the beginning. Linda Barrett didn't back down. She turned to the group of bikers with a tone of forced authority and said, "There's nothing to see here. Mr. Carter is confused. He's clearly suffering from memory loss. We serve 3 full meals every day, and our residents are well cared for." But Jake didn't move. Neither did the other men behind him. Instead, Marshal Hayes, a quiet but imposing member of the Riders, stepped forward. "Then you won't mind," he said, "if we take a look at your kitchen." Linda's eyes darted. "You can't just barge into private areas. This is a licensed facility. You have no right to—" But her voice was cut off by something soft, something almost too fragile to notice. A voice, faint but desperate. It came from a room just down the hall. "Please, help us." The tension snapped. The bikers pushed gently past Linda, not with violence, but with purpose. Room after room, the truth unfolded. Veterans who had once marched through fire, crossed oceans, and watched friends fall beside them, now lay in beds soaked with neglect. Blankets too thin for the cold, bones pressing through paper-thin skin, empty eyes staring up at ceiling tiles.
Jake entered one room and found a man he recognized from previous visits. James Lee, 93 years old, Navy veteran, soft-spoken but sharp. James reached out a trembling hand and whispered, "She's been taking everything. The food budget, our meds, even our things. Things from the war." He gestured weakly toward an empty drawer. Photos, watches, medals, gone. Jake's hands clenched at his sides. He rushed back to his uncle's room. The drawer where Frank kept his bronze star was open, empty. The watch their grandfather had passed down, gone. Even the faded photos of Frank's old unit, men who never made it home, had vanished. "Where are his things?" Jake asked Linda when he found her again in the hall. His voice was low, but his stare was burning. Linda tried to laugh it off. "It's not uncommon for dementia patients to misplace items. Sometimes they hide things and forget." The men said nothing, but the silence was louder than any shout. A reckoning was coming. Jake could feel it, and so could Linda. The truth wasn't just hidden in drawers or behind locked doors. It was written on every face in that hallway. The kind of truth that doesn't go away. The kind of truth that demands to be heard. Jake didn't need more proof, but his uncle gave it anyway. With hands trembling from age, not fear, Frank Carter reached into the inside pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a worn smartphone. The screen was cracked, the case faded, but what was inside changed everything. "I may be old, but I'm not crazy, and I'm not quiet." He opened the gallery and tapped on a video. Linda Barrett's voice played clearly. She was speaking to a nurse, telling her to cut back meal portions. "They won't notice," she had said, laughing. "Just say we're working on a new diet plan."
Another clip showed Linda slipping cash envelopes into her purse, money handed over by the families of residents meant for care, medication, and supplies. The final clip was hard to watch. Linda's voice again, this time instructing a young staff member to clear out an entire room of belongings. "If he passes tonight," she said, "we can get the space ready for a private pay client tomorrow." Jake's jaw tightened as he watched. The other bikers leaned in silently, their eyes fixed not on the screen, but on Linda, who stood frozen at the end of the hallway. She tried to grab the phone, lunging toward Frank with a sharp motion, but Jake was faster. He caught her wrist midair and held it firmly until she dropped to her knees. "Touch him again," he said quietly, "and you'll need a care facility of your own." Linda screamed, "That's assault! I'll have you arrested!" But another voice calmly joined in, Marshall, already recording the entire interaction. "Good," he said. "Let's get the police involved. Let's get everything on the record." Suddenly, Linda tried to make a run for it, but two bikers stepped into her path, blocking her with nothing more than crossed arms and quiet determination. "Sit down," Jake said. "We're having a conversation." Within minutes, the local police arrived. Along with them came Dr. Rachel Kim, a geriatric specialist who had been quietly investigating the unusually high death rate at Golden Willow. She had tried to get access before, but had been turned away. This time, with witnesses, footage, and a room full of suffering veterans, she didn't need permission. She reviews the charts, the care logs, and the medication schedules. Then she spoke, her voice steady but cold. "This is not just neglect. This is a pattern, a deliberate act. These men were malnourished. Medications were withheld. This is criminal."
Linda Barrett was arrested that same afternoon. The initial charges included elder abuse and negligent homicide, but everyone in that hallway knew this was just the beginning. As officers led her out of Golden Willow, she still tried to twist the story. "These people are old," she said. "They're confused. Nothing they say will hold up." But it wasn't just what the veterans had said. It was what they had shown. The videos, the missing possessions, the malnourishment, and the empty medical logs told a story that was too consistent, too clear to ignore. As the case gained attention, federal authorities got involved. The Department of Justice opened an inquiry. They uncovered a disturbing pattern. Linda had worked at 2 other care facilities in the past decade. Both had seen suspiciously high death rates during her time there. Families from those places came forward with similar stories: missing money, declining health, unanswered questions. Now the charges grew: financial exploitation, criminal negligence, and multiple counts of involuntary manslaughter. The media caught on quickly. The headline ran across national news within hours: nursing home director accused of starving veterans to death. It all led to one moment. In a courtroom packed with cameras, lawyers, and reporters, Frank Carter sat in his wheelchair, facing the woman who had tried to silence him. He looked thinner than he should have, but his eyes were steady. His voice, though aged, didn't waver. "I survived Okinawa," he began. "I watched friends die with honor. We were promised that if we made it home, we'd be taken care of, that we could rest. But this woman made sure we couldn't." The room was silent. No one moved as he continued. "She didn't see us as heroes. She saw us as a paycheck. She stole our food, our dignity, and our final years."
Then he said something that would stay with everyone who heard it. At least our enemies back then wore uniforms. This one wore a smile. Linda avoided eye contact. The weight of the testimony and the presence of veterans who had shown up from across the country was undeniable. The jury didn't need long. She was sentenced to life in federal prison with no chance of parole. But for the men who had lived under her care, and for those who never made it out, justice was not just a sentence, it was a reckoning, and it had finally come. After the trial, most people would have thought the story was over. The villain had been sentenced, the headlines had faded. But for Jake Carter and the Iron Legacy riders, walking away was never an option. They didn't come to Golden Willow just to make noise. They came to make sure it never happened again. Within a week, the riders returned, not in protest this time, but with purpose. They brought food, fresh linens, and trusted caregivers. They coordinated with local veterans groups and churches to make sure every resident received what they needed. They didn't wear badges or carry titles, but their presence meant something. It meant safety. Frank Carter gained back some weight and even some color in his cheeks. He started telling stories again, real stories, not the ones he had been afraid to speak out loud. Jake sat by his side almost every weekend, and sometimes they just watched old war films in silence. The Bronze Star was recovered from a pawn shop in a neighboring town. Jake had driven there himself, paid for it in full, and placed it back in his uncle's hands. It wasn't about medals. It was about memory, about dignity.
The walls of Golden Willow began to change, not with paint or decoration, but with photographs. Pictures of the men who had lived and died there, each one framed, each name remembered. They weren't there to shame the past, but to protect the future. A reminder that silence costs lives, and remembrance saves them. Every week, someone from the riders would stop by, not to cause trouble, not to flex muscle, but to check on the kitchen, the medicine cabinet, and the way the staff spoke to those under their care. No one argued, no one complained. Respect had returned. And something else began to happen. Other nursing homes took notice. Directors, once comfortable behind closed doors, suddenly found themselves being watched, not by regulators or inspectors, but by men with leather jackets and quiet eyes. Word spread quickly. 3 more facilities were found starving their residents, cutting medications and pocketing funds. 3 more arrests were made. The system had cracks, but now the cracks had eyes. Frank Carter lived for almost 3 more years after the trial. They were quiet years, but good ones. He spent mornings in the courtyard, reading letters from old friends, and afternoons watching the birds outside his window. The pain in his bones never left, but the weight in his heart began to lift. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, he felt heard, and he knew he wasn't alone anymore. Jake visited often, sometimes just to sit with him, sometimes to listen. Frank didn't talk much about Linda Barrett after the trial, not because he had forgotten, but because he had moved beyond her. What mattered now were the men still living and the memories of those who didn't make it. When Frank passed, the service was simple, just like he had asked. No big speeches, no grand ceremony. But that didn't stop people from coming. Almost 300 bikers showed up that day, riding in slow formation down the quiet streets, engines low and steady like a hymn. Veterans from different wars stood beside young men with tattoos and leather jackets. There were no barriers between them, only shared respect.
At Golden Willow, a small memorial was built in the garden. It wasn't fancy, just a stone wall with the names of every veteran who had passed during Linda's time as director. Not to remember her, but to honor them. Flowers were left daily. Sometimes it was a full bouquet, sometimes just a single rose. But every bloom carried a message. You were not forgotten. Some names had no family left to visit, but they had something else now. They had brothers in arms, even if those brothers rode Harleys instead of Humvees. Above the names, a simple line was etched in stone. It read, "They deserved better. Never again." And below that, in smaller print, "Protected forever by the Iron Legacy Riders." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was a promise. One made not with words, but with action. And for the men who had once been left to suffer in silence, it meant more than any medal ever could. Every Memorial Day, a package arrives at the federal prison where Linda Barrett now serves her sentence. It's always the same. Black and white photographs of young men in uniform, smiling on the day they shipped off to war. Men who survived the beaches of Normandy, the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of Iraq. Men who lived through things most people couldn't imagine, only to come home and be forgotten. Each photo carries no message, no letter, no name. But the meaning is clear. These are the faces of the ones she betrayed, and they will never let her forget. Some might say the bikers went too far, that their presence at her trial, at her house, outside every facility she had worked in, that it was excessive. But justice is not always clean. Sometimes it shows up in denim and leather, with calloused hands and quiet eyes. Sometimes it looks like a man who lost his grandfather to neglect and decided no one else should suffer the same fate.
Jake Carter doesn't tell this story often. He doesn't need to. The veterans remember. The families remember. And the care workers at Golden Willow, now under new leadership, carry out their jobs with a renewed sense of purpose. There are no more missing meals, no more unanswered calls. And every new resident is told the same story when they arrive. A story about the day a group of bikers showed up and changed everything. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about dignity, about the belief that those who served deserve more than silence and pain in their final years. It was about reminding the world that heroes don't stop being heroes just because they get old. Sometimes they just need someone younger to keep fighting beside them. Frank Carter's last words to his nephew weren't bitter. They weren't angry. They were simple, and they were true. "We fought so you wouldn't have to," he said. "But sometimes evil doesn't stay gone. It just hides. Thank you, son, for finishing the fight." And maybe that's what brotherhood really means. Not just riding together, not just standing together, but protecting those who once protected us all. no matter how old they are, no matter how long it takes. No mercy for those who forget what that sacrifice was worth.